morning. Is Councillor Ainsley checking in?
Good morning, Councillor Ainsley. Confirming we can hear and see you in the room.
Excellent. Thank you.
This is Kate, the clerk for the Service Excellence Committee meeting. It's now 10:04, and I'm just going to do a roll call for members present in the meeting. Chair Holliday.
Present.
Councillor Ainsley.
Present.
Councillor Chang. Councillor Chang. Absent. Councillor Perks. Councillor Perks.
Present.
Present.
Hello?
Mr. Chair, that's quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. In just a moment, I'll move some papers around and we'll get the meeting started then. So good morning, everybody. My name is Councillor Stephen Holliday. I am the chair of the Service Excellence Committee. The clerk has advised me that we have quorum, so I'd like to now call our meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. I will just begin by thanking everyone for their patience. I would like to acknowledge that both the clerk's staff, the technical staff, and members of council, including those not present, have worked feverishly to overcome some technical issues. And I thank everyone for their patience and ask in advance, should there be any technical issues through the meeting, that you offer us the grace of your patience. Today's meeting is being held by video conference and in person at City Hall in Committee Room number 2. This meeting is also being live streamed online at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. Although we may be meeting in different locations today, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. If you are registered to speak at today's meeting, please listen for me to call your name. I will call speakers in the order that they appear on the list. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the Service Excellence Committee page at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. Members, the City Clerk has provided all agenda materials on toronto.ca/council and on CMP, the Clerk's meeting portal. I also want to remind you to please submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at svext@toronto.ca to help with motions. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you do have an interest, please raise your hand and unmute your mic. Seeing none, we will proceed. May I have a motion to confirm the minutes from our last meeting on May 31st, 2024? Moved by Councillor Ainsley. All those in favor? Any opposed? That item carries. And now we'll begin our agenda. Our first agenda item is SE 4.1, Senior Services and Long-Term Care Service Excellence. There's a presentation on that matter, so that item will be held. SE 4.2, Service Line Block Standards and Improving Response. I just ask you to bear with me for a moment while I switch screens. I will hold that item for questions. SE 4.3, Toronto at your service, service request expansion and contact center, consolidation. I will hold that item for questions. And SE 4.4, complaints and compliments, phase 2 plan. I will hold that item for questions. We'll now go back to the top of our agenda. Madam Clerk, I will ask if you could let the staff know that it's time for the presentation. And we will go to SE 4.1, Senior Services and Long-Term Care Service Excellence.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you through the chair. My name is Jennifer Dockery, and I'm the General Manager for Senior Services and Long-Term Care. With me today is Leslie McCallum, who is the Director for Senior Services and Community Programs, and she will be leading the presentation. So over to you, Leslie.
Thank you so much, through the chair. Thank you again for giving us the opportunity to showcase a piece of our work in community programs called the Homemakers and Nursing Services Program, and how we took some steps to improve our client service experience. Before we move into the material, I just want to give you a broad overview of our division, Senior Services and Long-Term Care. We are basically responsible for three pieces. One that some of you will be very familiar with, which is the 10 city-operated long-term care homes that we operate across the city. The second is a senior services division, where we look at coordinating programs and services, as well as developing, for instance, our citywide Toronto senior strategies. And the third piece is community programs. And within community programs, there are three groups of services. The first is the supportive housing program. The second, which we will be speaking to today, is the Homemakers and Nurses Services program. And then the third is an adult daycare program, which runs out of some of our city-operated long-term care homes. So just by way of an overview then of our Homemakers and Nurses Services program, we are supporting Toronto seniors who age in place by providing homemaking services. I will get to what those are in a second, but broad overview, we're looking at serving 2,000 clients per year, translates to 42,600 visits per year, and 95,450 hours of service per year. The program itself is administered by staff at SSLTC, and the homemaking services are provided by contracted service agencies. We have contracts with 7 service agencies across the city. This is a model of service that is used for HM&S programs across the province. It is also the model of service that is used by home care province-wide. Our clients are concentrated in the southeast area of downtown Toronto, in Scarborough, and in East York. And if you look at the Toronto Public Health map, which is that overlays where the concentration of seniors are in the city, the overlay being low-income seniors in the city, these three areas actually map and track with that low-income seniors distribution of the population in the city of Toronto. This is a service that is provided free of charge to clients who meet the eligibility criteria. Those eligibility criteria are financial is the #1 driver. So this is very much a program that is designed to support low-income seniors who could not otherwise afford to pay for the services themselves. The services that we provide include things like light housekeeping, laundry, incidental grocery shopping, some light meal prep. We do one-on-one individual wellness promotion, and we also do service coordination as well as referrals into other community resources as needed by the client. So this case study is about us coming out of COVID. During COVID, our HM&S program, we stopped accepting any new applicants. So the service consisted of serving clients who were already on our roster. And when we started coming out of COVID, we noticed that there was a 55% increase in what we're referring to as customer service issues that were attributed to the service provision following that return to starting with new admissions into the program. The nature of those issues that were being raised with us were missed visits, a lack of continuity of care, which is anchored directly to the fact that coming out of COVID, our homemakers, there was a large turnover in the homemakers, and as is across the province, it's very, very difficult to find staff to do these positions. So the lack of continuity care was being brought forward by clients. And the third piece is that we noticed from the calls that we were getting, there appeared to be a breakdown or even poor communication between the agencies that we are subcontracting the service to with their clients. So an example I would give you would be a homemaker just not showing up. And rather than the agency contacting the client to explain that there's either, there's something has happened and they're not going to receive their service, they just weren't getting any information at all. There was also a big shift in the communication and the level of communication between the actual agencies and our teams. And we believe that part of that was also that while we had turnover in the homemaker side of the business, we also had turnover at the agency side, their supervisors and coordinators. There was quite a churn rate of those supervisors and coordinators. And so we decided that obviously there was something that we needed to do about this. Just to put in context kind of service expectations that are set on our team as well on the agencies that we subcontract to, our overall mission at Senior Services and Long-Term Care is to support Toronto seniors and people living in long-term care to have the healthiest, most fulfilling lives possible through the delivery of exceptional care and services. Specifically speaking to what those values are, we call it the CARE values: compassion, accountability, respect, and excellence. And how those translate into what we do at the HMNS program is compassion in terms of delivering care in a respectful manner, being client-focused, and really ensuring that there is a continuity of care being delivered. Accountability is about access to timely access to not only the services, but also timely access to our response. We get many client calls a day through our caseworkers, and there is an expectation through that accountability piece that the clients are responded to in a timely manner and that their issues are resolved. Respect deals with both our staff, our clients, and our agencies. So it's critical that at all times that we move forward with respect and that we treat people with respect. And then in terms of excellence, there is an expectation that the quality of the services being delivered are of high standard and certainly would also be streamlined in terms of the client's access to services. So looking at how we addressed this 55% increase in client issues being raised is that we developed a multi-pronged action plan. We knew that two of the drivers to the increase in client dissatisfaction was the high turnover in our homemakers, as well as a high turnover in our the supervisors and coordinators who were working for the agencies. So we tried to attack each of those pieces. The first was we created an educational video for homemaking agencies that was used to provide training to the frontline homemakers. What we wanted to do was orient the homemakers, because again, there are a lot of new homemakers coming on board. We want to orient them to the program and to the population being served. It was really important that they understood that what they are doing is a critical contributor to allowing our seniors to continue to age in place. It may not sound like a huge deal to have a homemaker come in and do your laundry, but for many of our seniors, that is actually one of the breaking points for them no longer being able to reside in their homes. So during this educational video, we also set very clear service and communication expectations. Again, we set the context to how important the work is that they are doing to allow our seniors to age in place. And we also were looking at this as a way to assist our agencies with recruitment and retention of their homemakers. So that was the first piece. The second one is that we developed a robust in-person training program for our agency supervisors and coordinators. All 7 agencies received education in their offices delivered in person by our HMNS caseworkers. This also re-articulated their service and communication expectations, because we had seen that in that return post-COVID, that the communication was dropping, and not only the quality but the frequency of the communication between the agency and our staff was declining. And we also used it was done in person because we used it as an opportunity to really build relationships with the agencies. They're the ones in our residents' homes delivering the services, and so building a really strong relationship with the agency is a critical piece to ensuring that the actual service delivered is of high quality. The third thing we did was we established biweekly review meetings with agencies with the highest volumes of issues being reported. So through our tracking of all 7 agencies and where the calls were coming from, which clients the calls were coming from, we were able to identify that 2 of the 7 agencies had a significantly more volume of calls. So what we did with them is those 2 agencies, our caseworkers met with them on a biweekly basis. They went through every issue that had been noted by clients at their agencies, and they sat down together with the supervisors and coordinators to actually problem solve in real time and implement changes. Pleased to report on that piece that in fact they've moved now from bi-weekly to monthly meetings because things are going so much smoother now and the communication is flowing better. The fourth piece we did, because it's a critical piece to ensure that this becomes part of our practice as opposed to just a crisis that we moved into and tried to solve, is that we've also completed policy and process reviews to ensure that what we are communicating in terms of our expectations for service, as well as communication from our agencies, is actually embedded in our policies and procedures so that this becomes now not a one and done, but a continual kind of anchor in terms of continuous improvement. So just looking at the reach of the 2 first pieces, the educational program as well as the in-person training, we've reached over 60 supervisors have been trained in person, coordinators and supervisors have been trained in person, and over 150 to 160 homemakers have actually received the educational video. Both of those pieces are now in place and will be part of our ongoing process moving forward. As homemakers are onboarded onto the agencies know now to use that educational video as part of their orientation program. And as new supervisors and coordinators come on board, we also go back and do in-person trainings. And looking at the overall impact or the outcomes, we have actually reduced the number of issues being raised by clients per week by 82%. We also have improved the communication with the agencies and their clients and between the agency and HMNS staff. And we believe that, while I can't link it completely to the 4 initiatives that we put in place, we believe that those first 2 pieces, the educational video as well as the in-person training, have been significant contributors to the reduction that we have seen in the number of issues being raised. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Are there questions of staff? Very good. I will take a moment to ask one. Madam Clerk, I'll beg your indulgence because I can't control the timer. If you could help me with that, thank you. I don't think I need 5. Thank you for the presentation. The presentation is very helpful and timely as we consider a later report on the agenda, which has to do with complaints and compliments. And you've outlined a number of steps that you've taken to address complaints in the system. One of the things that stands out to me about this particular service is that it is highly complex because there's a lot of involved individuals. There's the service provider, there's an array of clients, there's the oversight systems. There's also some challenges potentially with connection because of the users of the service and accessing electronic channels or various channels. And finally, there's a high degree of subjectivity. So what one person may find excellent, another person may not find satisfactory. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the evolution of the complaints and compliments process, how it may parallel or complement or eventually fold within the city's larger process, and how you deal with the subjectivity. Because it, as I said, it depends on, I guess, beauty is in the eye of the beholder sometimes.
So thank you for that question through the chair. Yeah, it is incredibly complex. So one of the things we have a couple of ways that we look at our program evaluation in terms specifically around how do we receive client feedback. One of the ways we do that is through an annual survey that we do called Your Opinion Counts. And given the target that we are dealing with, these are hard copies of a survey that are actually mailed out to each of the client's residences, along with a self-addressed envelope so they can just put it, and stamped that they can just return it and send it back to us. It's both a quantitative as well as a qualitative piece. So while our quantitative scores are very high, typically our satisfaction levels are in the 90s on this program. Where we actually mine the more interesting data, in my view, is through the qualitative piece. And that is where people share their individual experiences. And often, as you know, people are more apt to tell us what they don't feel is going really well rather than what is going well. And what we do with that data is that is all then, so the qualitative data is then transferred over to a spreadsheet, and then we look at clustering the data to look at like themes that are coming through. So that is where we can tease out the individual subjectivity and move it to a higher level. If it's one person who is just being highly critical of the program, it's not actually going to rise to the surface when we do that thematic analysis. So that's how we handle the individual kind of subjectivity of things. We are also, the other piece where we're getting client feedback is pretty much on the daily, and those are the clients who are calling our caseworkers who are very familiar with these clients day in and day out. And again, they're able to tease out where the client is really just wanting someone familiar to talk to. So while the homemakers, there is a high churn rate, our caseworkers are an incredibly stable group of people in terms of their employment. And so what we find is that our clients become quite attached and quite close to the caseworkers. It is not unusual for me to get a call in my office from a client of the Homemakers program, and what they want to do is vent to me, and then they say, I don't want to talk to the homemaker, I want to talk to my caseworker. So the relationship is there. So that's another way where we're actually keeping an eye on the feedback that's coming in. And because clients are very, very well known by our 14 caseworkers, they're also able to tease out so a situation, where they feel that perhaps this client is now, there's been a change in their circumstances, and perhaps we need to get more services wrapped around them. Perhaps they need some stability programs put in place. So that's kind of the way that we do it. So it's our surveys plus our phone calls that are coming in directly to our caseworkers, as well as the assessments that the caseworkers are doing kind of on a regular basis.
Thank you. And finally, do you seem to get a high response rate with respect to the paper surveys?
We get a decent response rate. And that is something that over time, I think we would ideally like to make it more of a multimodal way of getting responses. We, in our supportive housing program, actually translate our survey into the languages that are most prevalent in the buildings that the supportive housing programs are in. Like to see us moving that way as well with our HM&S program.
Great, thank you. I'll ask the committee if there's any further questions. Councillor Chang, please go ahead. And are you able to see the timer?
I can't, but I will monitor my time.
I'll let you know if we get close. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And I just noticed that the clients are concentrated in Toronto, Scarborough, and East York. And I'm wondering why is that? Is that because our service providers tend to be clustered there, or the needs are not existing as much in North York and Etobicoke?
Thank you for the question through the chair. No, Councillor Chang, it is because we are serving the low-income population, and so the areas of service are actually, if we look at the Toronto Public Health mapping of where low-income seniors reside, it actually tracks with that. So this is where unlike where our seniors across the city are distributed, there are pockets of concentration for low-income seniors, and those look quite different than the concentration of seniors in general without that socio-demographic screen on. So our agencies are all across the city. There's no restriction for us in terms of where the service will be provided. Our 7 agencies actually cover the city. It's really around the eligibility criteria that dictate where those clusters for this program are.
And is there a wait list for this service?
Through the chair, yes, there is a wait list. We have a wait list of about 12 to 18 months.
Which could be a critical window for some seniors who might be facing concern of health, right?
Correct.
And is this funded by the city?
Through the chair, this is 80% funded by the Ministry of Health and 20% by the city.
Great. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Cheng. Are there members wishing to speak? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, I wondered if you could assist, if you could post the motion on how this matter is disposed with. It would be most helpful.
Mr. Chair, I don't have a motion for this item.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Madam Clerk?
Sorry, I don't have a motion from you for this item.
I'll take your advice. Do we need to advance this to the executive, like a motion for the executive committee to receive, or does the committee here just receive the presentation?
We can prepare a motion for the committee to forward this item to the executive committee to receive the presentation, if that's the committee's wish.
Or alternatively, I'm satisfied to receive it at the committee. I just want to make sure that we handle it in the right manner.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, on a point of order, I don't need to speak, but I can move a motion to receive the item here.
Madam Clerk, to you for advice. Is that in order and appropriate for the disposition of the item?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's appropriate. We'll have the motion prepared if someone wants to move it.
Councillor Ainsley's moving.
Thank you.
Great. Are you okay if I call the vote?
Yes, please.
Great. So all those in favor of receiving the item for information? And that carries. Thank you. I just beg everyone's indulgence. I'm looking at multiple screens here to make this work. We'll now go on to item SE 4.2, which is sewer line block service standards and improving responses. Yes, we do have a presentation posted, so I will invite the staff from Toronto Water to make that presentation as soon as they're ready. Thank you.
Okay, through the chair, if you're ready to proceed, I'm ready to proceed as well.
Please go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting us to present on Toronto Water. I'll start also with a general background on our division, as my colleague did earlier. Just put in the context the programs that Toronto Water is responsible for. So we deal with all the drinking water treatment and supply systems in the city, as well as the wastewater collection and treatment systems, and all the stormwater management systems. We're one of the largest municipally owned wastewater utilities in North America, with asset values of over $90 billion, over 1,900 staff, and we operate in a highly regulated environment. In order to do so, we use a 10-year strategic plan, and we're in fact in our second generation of that strategic plan. The first time we put one in place was 2010 to 2020. That has been updated, and we're into the 2020 and 2030 plan. One of the key features of that plan is that we've focused on 5 guiding principles and then broken it down into focus areas and strategies for our division. And one of the most important guiding principles is dealing with customer-centric services. So I'm going to focus on that one slice of the pie, the 1/5 of our strat plan. So if we focus in on the customer-centric service issues, there's a number of performance measures that we have in place within Toronto Water. They deal with measuring our most critical services that we provide, and they're broken down into a number of different segments. So our customer-centric service KPIs There are the traditional 311 service standards that most people see and have been presented to this committee already. There are then some of the Tier 2 services that we provide. They're more detailed and complex, like new services and processing applications for the mandatory downspout disconnection programs, as well as basement flooding subsidy programs. That's handled by our customer care group and our customer service programs. And then we have quite a number of other metrics that we measure in Toronto Water operations, as we do have some regulatory requirements in order to maintain the system. The presentation that was provided several months back by the customer service division showed you total volumes in 2023 of about 487,000 calls that had come in to 311. Of that, Toronto Water represented 8%, or 38,000 calls. And if we break down a bit further and look into one of the boxes, you'll see that Toronto Water's top call is a sewer service line or block service lines. And that's why we wanted to focus on that today in our presentation. That represented about 7,000, just over 7,000 calls last year. Now, in addition to that, just that one, as I mentioned, we have quite a number of different dashboards that we use and track throughout the year. We use it for customer response. We use it for reporting to our regulator. And we use it also for plotting operational efficiencies and mapping out our long-term capital improvements. Now, the sewer service line block issue is one, unfortunately, that some homeowners will experience. Usually it's a difficult situation for them. That blockage can occur for a number of different reasons. They could have debris within their drain that gets flushed down from their internal plumbing. They could have grease deposits in there. It could be also external from tree roots that work its way in through broken or defective pipes. What makes it challenging when you're managing this issue is the service line is actually jointly owned. There's a portion of it that is owned by the homeowner from when it leaves the house that goes to the property line, and from the property line to the sewer, that is a segment that is owned by the city, and then we're responsible for maintaining that. So a lot of the calls are related to figuring out where that problem exists in that line, and then who's responsible for managing the repair of that. The way we've set up that response is residents call 311 when they experience a symptom of a sewer line block, and the most serious of which is wastewater backing up through basement drains or the fixtures, usually in the basement area. Our service standard that we put in place quite a while ago is Toronto Water would respond to that customer service request that is generated by 311 within 4 hours. And if we look at our statistics from 2023, 86% of those were completed within that service standard. Now, that means that we attended to the site and we started the investigation. Sometimes it can be cleared with one visit. There are many times where a subsequent work order has to be put in place, and we'll have to follow up and schedule another specific appointment with that homeowner. And there are certain cases where we will determine that it's actually a private property matter, and then it's up to the homeowner to contact a drain contractor or tree root removal company, and then they have to manage it because it's a private matter. What impacts our ability to achieve that service standard? Obviously, and I wrote this presentation before this week, so the first point, the spike in demand, weather events, obviously impacts our service delivery. So for example, we are not meeting our 4-hour window right now, and it's probably going to take us about 7 to 10 days to catch up on all the complaints that we received over the past week. We've also identified sometimes workflow gaps that exist in the system as we handle that call from triage to actually getting it repaired. And then there's technology gaps because we use different technologies between 311 and within Toronto Water as well. So how do we go about trying to fill some of those gaps? Well, we drill down on some of the problematic situations we have. So I'm going to highlight a case study, one that we had, in fact, this year, and we're working through how to improve our system. So this was a situation where we had a local restaurant called. They had a block sewer, which caused their drains and toilets to back up. And the restaurant ended up being closed for 12 days while we were figuring out what was going on. Now, it was a complex site, so the site conditions were primarily responsible for the long repair times. However, when we went through it after the event, and after discussing with the homeowner the experiences they went through, or sorry, the restaurant owner in this case, we did determine that there were some gaps in the escalation process to make sure that we prioritize or code that unresolved request properly. So within the system, the coding goes in and it's treated as a service line blockage, and we know that. But once we are in a triage mode, and I'll use the example of you've gone into the emergency room and you're trying to figure out what is going on and you've got a complex situation. You need to be able to change that coding and priority when you are still in that triage mode. And so that's an improvement that we're going to make within our system. So our customer care center is currently reviewing the procedures used for escalating these open service requests. So we haven't closed it yet. Our staff are still investigating, but we want to make sure that that's flagged and raised up to more senior levels, that we're aware that this service request is taking longer. And so therefore, when there is extended time or extra visits required to complete that investigation, particularly those affecting businesses, that we can have appropriate interjection by supervisors and managers if need be. In fact, we were successful in implementing a similar triage type system with high-rise customers several years ago. Originally, when the system was set up, when we had a no water call, there will be someone saying we don't have water. It will be triggered as just one service having no water. Well, that service could feed 1,000 people in an apartment, and we had set up the system not to catch that. So we worked with our colleagues in 311 to script a series of questions now that get asked when someone says, we have no water. And we'll ask them, what type of property is it? How many people are there? Is it a business? Or is it a high-rise residential? So gaining that extra information up front allows us to properly code that call and then dispatch our crews accordingly based on that priority. Just to give you some examples of how we go back and triage when we do have a hiccup in customer service. Other measures that we've taken in Toronto Water over the course of the last year and a half. So I completed a large organizational review of our Toronto Water Customer Care Center. We had created that back in 2017 after the frozen water services episode, if some people remember that, back in 2015. So I thought it was time to do a review, and we completed that, and we have a bunch of recommendations to improve our operations in that area. I also realigned that area, moved a couple units out of it, so it could just focus on customer experience and technology, and created a new director position, which got filled in December, and we have in March. It was announced in December, filled in March, and we have that new director in place, and he's working on some strategic plans. We are refreshing that strategic plan and the customer service plan and updating our key performance indicators. We're working on web forms now to try to digitize as much as possible all the various customer programs we have. We're looking at mobile tools as well. One of the things we want to be able to provide homeowners with is an estimated time of arrival when our staff are in the field. We don't have that technology yet in place. We would love to have that. That's where some of the technology gaps exist right now. We want to improve our one contact resolution, and therefore that will all lead, in our opinion, to improved caller wait times. When I mentioned we're updating our key performance indicators, and why are we doing it? This is a map of all of our indicators we had from the original strategic plan, the first 10-year plan. We are realigning it now to match our new goals and strategies, and we'll have in place by the end of the year a whole new key performance indicator system tracking all 5 of our guiding principles, not just the customer-centric piece. But if we focus just on the customer-centric piece, just to highlight it, the customer-centric service principle is to ensure that we're focused our resources on expanding and access to programs and services, effectively communicating it with customers, enhancing the customer experience and customer satisfaction. So these are some of the large strategies that we put into our strategic plan, and we've developed various other goals that we'll be working on over the number of years. And I've put them in there. I'm not going to read them for you, but they're in the presentation. So you can see that that's documented and shared with all staff in Toronto Water, and we meet regularly to discuss how do we get these outcomes. So that's the end of our presentation, and open to questions.
Thank you, Mr. DiGeronimo. Are there questions of staff? Councillor Chen, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just thank you for the presentation. One of the things that we always see the biggest challenges is in communication. So when there is an urgent matter, and how we're able to let people know, especially when it's impacting people's lives or safety. And I'm just wondering, who manages the emergency response communications? Do you work with Stratcom on that, and who's taking the lead on how these critical pieces of information are communicated with the community?
So quick answer is yes, we do work with strategic communication. In fact, we have a dedicated shared relationship with them where we provide some funding to them to get that kind of support. But not just emergency services, but also then in our plan, program, and long-term communication strategies. So we work very closely with them. So when we do have an event of an emergency nature, so let's just take this week. This wasn't just a Toronto Water issue. It affected the entire city. But we work through the staff in strategic communication, and quite frequently, I'll be in touch with the head of communications as well to develop the messages and make sure that we're communicating properly. So we have a direct relationship with them, and have had that for many years.
And what are the primary distribution channels of this information? Is it, I know we use a lot of press releases, but is social media an important aspect of this? And are there pieces of Toronto Water communications that then also go to the door for people that's by mail?
Yes to all those. So we have extensive communication program in place. So we do have door knockers, we have pamphlets and brochures. We equip our field staff with information that when they visit and attend a homeowner, they can leave behind information that explain certain issues, as well as whether they're eligible for various programs that we have. So that exists. We regularly review and update that. We have a digital strategy that we developed several years ago to try to enhance our use of social media, and we use the resources of our strategic communication group to do that, and I look forward to doing more of that. We did not develop our own. We did not want to brand our own channels. We're using the corporate channels, but it's about making sure that we have the right staff resources in place. You know, we did not want our operational people. I love our operations people, but I want them focused on fixing things, and I want our communications people to be embedded in helping us get those messages out when we're using social media, and that we've been developing over time. And then, of course, we have standard programs that we put in place every year, seasonal programs. We just completed recently the basement flooding program. Every year, for 6 weeks, we remind people how to protect their homes because storms are coming. That program just ended a week or two ago, and I was just looking at the uptake rates from people going to our website based on that campaign. So we've got all aspects of communication in our plan.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Lou, I wanted to ask, the recent storm we had, there was a large amount of sewage that got released into the lake, and I get questions from residents about do better, build more water plants. You know, the city's water system is antiquated, which, you know, I took issue with being a councillor for a long time. And I just had a great tour of the Highland Creek treatment plant and saw the updated technology. But could you talk a bit about how Toronto Water has to deal with that during a storm of that magnitude?
Sure. Let's start with the storm of that magnitude. That's the key point. And so I'll highlight the plant you just toured, Highland Creek. That's on a separated sewer system. So it does not have the same issue as downtown, where you have a combined system where you got stormwater mixing with sewage. Highland Creek had to bypass part of its treatment process during this storm. And that's just because even though it's separated, you do get a lot of infiltration when you have such high volumes of water in roadways and in systems. It does work its way into the sanitary system and causes the plant to see excessive flows. And in order to protect that plant, not have it out of service and damaged, we have controlled bypasses, and it's designed into the plant, and we have regulations that permit that, but we have to report it to the regulator, and we do so to the public as well when that occurs. So storm of that magnitude, no treatment plant is designed to handle that volume. Now, if we get into the combined area, the big issue that we're dealing with there is we're building a lot of storage systems that will hold back that extra flow of water in large storage tunnels and storage silos. We will then release it after the storm for appropriate treatment. So that's what we're doing in the downtown core. But that's a significant investment. It's going to be several billions of dollars to build, and will take us a while. But that's well underway with phase 1 of the Coxwell bypass being built right now.
Okay, thanks, Lou. And the other question I wanted to ask is, we're having these larger storms, and we're trying to, deal with climate change, and we have issues with basement flooding. I know in a couple of areas of my ward, we're doing basement flooding studies. But one of the questions that I continually get asked by people is, how can I get a rain barrel? How can I disconnect my downspouts? And how can I get a rain barrel from the City of Toronto? And I understood we discontinued that program a number of years ago. Is there any thought to putting it back in place as we're trying to keep, water on people's properties and dispose of it, the natural way and not in our stormwater system?
So that program was bundled together with the Environment Days. So what we did is just funded those rain barrels as part of that event. When that stopped, the programs were discontinued, and so the rain barrels, I would say, would be effective on regular rain days, but on a significant storm event that you just had, it would really not have had much of impact on holding back that flow. It is a good measure, though, that homeowners should be using in order to manage flow. It helps at least attenuate the flow coming off of a downspout, and then you can use it for irrigation purposes. So that those programs are not in place now, and we've been just pushing the mandatory downspout program that's in place.
Okay. And is there any thought about putting the rain barrel program back in place, or just encouraging people to disconnect their downspouts?
Yeah, no, we have not brought forward any incentive or changes to our incentive programs.
Is it a financial, does it not make monetary sense for us to do it? Or the
big issue would be monetary, and then the logistics or administration of it. The previous program worked because we teamed up with other divisions that were doing an Environment Day event. If we were going to be supplying them, then you have the logistics of purchasing them, storing them, getting access, and so it becomes an expensive proposition. If you look at a rebate system, then you have to make sure that you go through a process of quantifying which rain barrels we would agree to fund, because not all rain barrels function the same way. That's a lesson we learned with the toilet rebate program. We had to verify that if we were going to provide funding, we were providing funding for things that functioned. So there's a lot of administration to setting up those types of programs.
And sorry, Mr. Chair, just my last question. Lou, I just wanted to ask about recently the glitch in the system. I'll call it a glitch with people. I think there was a couple of thousand people not receiving their utility bills, and there was issues, I believe, with the batteries in the wireless transmitters or water meter transmitters. If you'd explain that, please. Thank you.
Sure. The way we built our meter data collection system is you have the meter that is connected by wire to a transmission unit that then sends the data to data collection units, a fixed area network that we put across the city, and then that sends the data to us at the city, and we use it for billing purposes. So that it's really that piece that it's attached to the meter. So the meter's fine, the meter's working fine, and it keeps turning. So we have consumption data. We just can't transmit it wirelessly. And that's because the batteries within that transmission unit is failing sooner than originally planned. So we're in negotiations now with the supplier to discuss the extended warranty provisions of the contract and dealing with supply issues, because we want to order a lot of these units, and they have to ramp up production and source all the material. So we continue those negotiations now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I got a couple, so I'll ask the clerk to help me with the timer. Mr. DiGeronimo, thank you for your presentation. So a sewer backup happens 365 days of the year, likely around the city for various reasons. And that's when, and many people notice it because the water comes back up through the drains. But as some of my colleagues asked about, there's storm events. It's kind of the same thing. But that has to do with something else happening in the system where there's so much water that it flows backwards into people's houses. And I just wondered how the city tracks both of those and differentiates between the two, and how you take the data to the next level, right? And look at how the city systems are performing, and you think about what the capital investments are that need to be made.
So if we take what I presented today, and I would focus on that being the day-to-day, dry day, no rain. And I gave you some examples of what causes individual backups for individual drains. And that's usually just isolated to a property. We work with the homeowner to explain, what caused that. And it could be on our side of the system or their side. And that's just pure maintenance and or making sure that you're keeping it clean and not obstructed. So we know that, and we do a lot of work with homeowners on educating them on that. With respect to the storm that you just described, what you have is a situation where the entire stormwater management system, which is not just sewers, it's also the overland flow component. Roadways are designed to carry rainwater to the catch basins. They fill up, and then you've got surcharging happening throughout the system. Once you get that much water in, you're getting all that water into the sewers, and that's where you get then the surcharging back into homes through floor drains if they do not have a backflow preventer. And in fact, some of the images that you saw on some of our sewers where the maintenance hole lids were lifted off and you saw water coming out of them. That's a surcharge system. That's just all the rainwater working its way into our pipes and too quickly. And you get that hydraulic pressure that causes the problem. You also find that in many cases, it might not be the sewer that's backing up into homes. It's actually stormwater. It's the foundation drains of the homes. It is the way the home is graded and the water's coming in. They got ponding all around their property, raises the water level around their foundation, and then it seeps into their basement. So we go by each home and visit and ask them a series of questions to try to determine what was experienced in that location. And we take that data and we use it in our modeling when we do our basement flooding studies.
Thank you. So the takeaway is people are going to call 311 when there's a sewer backup on a dry day. it's an emergency in the home or in the business. They can't function until it's sorted out. But on those days of really bad storms, even if there is a little backup through the floor drain or whatever drain, sometimes people report it, sometimes they don't. So, would you encourage people to call it in, even if it's after the fact, so that you're getting really good information about the performance of the city's sewer systems, and then you can plan for what needs to be done in the future?
Absolutely. We do encourage people to call 311. That data is invaluable to us. In fact, all of you in your wards have had basement flooding studies done. One of the things we do is we issue a survey to homeowners, ask them those types of questions. Have you experienced flooding before? Because we know some people don't report it, but we need to know about it so we can model our system, and then we can compare the results of the model to the experiences that have been brought forward by homeowners. In fact, one of the exercises I've asked our staff to do is to take the data we collect from this storm and go back and check our modeling to see how close we were with predicting the outcomes where we've done some work. So we've got some analysis that we want to do, and we will continue to do that with each storm event that hits the city, is refine our practices and focus our investments better.
Thank you. One other question is slightly different. You mentioned the statistic that your standard is to show up at the front door within about 4 hours of the call. And I think you did that 83% or
86%
of the time.
Give us credit for 3 more. 86.
Could you tell the committee how long it takes to actually fix the issue? And I realize it varies, but
Sure.
Is there a typical period? And then I'll ask one other part there just to finish my questions off is, we also talk at this committee about satisfaction of customers, of citizens. Are there things that contribute to people being happy or unhappy with respect to the service that go beyond just the service standard? And are there things that we should think about or data that we might see over time that might tell us a little bit of the story of Toronto Water? And I would say, I hear most often good things, good news stories than bad, but what can we think about or learn from the data?
Okay, so quickly walk through a simple issue of a back drain or a slow-moving drain. Sometimes our staff can actually help relieve the problem while they're there. They have some equipment that they could use, and just to relieve the blockage and at least clear it and let it flow. We have some camera technology too that we can use if there's a clean out that's there. So that's one issue. We try to tell homeowners is if you have a system that has a clean out that we can access and put cameras through, we can get quicker diagnosis of what the issue might be. The challenges on that one will be if we determine it's on private property. They're usually very disappointed that we, the city, will not complete the repair of that drain, and that they're going to have to call someone because it can be expensive to repair a drain. And so how we manage that experience and how we communicate that is always a challenge for our staff. That's why we've created brochures and help give them messaging when they're advising homeowners that it's their responsibility to deal with. When we're dealing with a more complicated one, say it's a collapsed sewer drain, and say it's on the city side, we find it and it's between the sidewalk and the sewer and the roadway. Well, that may take now another week or so to resolve, depending on how busy our crews are. We do have standby contracts, so we can use contractors too if we're too busy. A different work order gets scheduled and created, and we go to the site, make the repair, and then we have to come back later and do a permanent repair. So we're coming back there 2 and 3 times, and the extended duration can be several weeks. And that's where we get some frustration sometimes, because the homeowner is waiting for that repair. We can accelerate some and do it on an emergency basis. Our staff have the authority to do that. But communicating that to our residents is challenging for our frontline staff. They're doing their best job. They're providing the best advice they can, but they have to be careful to make sure that they're respecting what is private property and what is public property. So that's always a challenge for them.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I think every committee member has asked questions. Any follow-ups from anyone? Seeing none, members wishing to speak. Thank you, Mr. DiGeronimo.
Mr. Chair, it's Councillor Ainsley. I'm more than happy to move receipt of the presentation. I want to thank Mr. DiGeronimo and all of his staff for all of their hard work. I know he said he is working on an app for customer service, but I know I've talked with Lou about this before. I didn't have to have a water shutoff done last spring at my mom's house, and the staff that came well within the timeline that they said they were going to be there. I had to wait for a plumber. Had to have the water back on. Once again, they're very promptly. Gave me some assistance in trying to find the water shutoff that was buried under my mom's lawn under probably 10 years of dirt and topsoil. So I want to thank them for all of that. I've had a couple of tours this past year. The RC Harris filtration plant, as I mentioned earlier, I was in the Harris plant, and I know that Toronto staff in the water wastewater are very diligent, working very hard. And I just want to express my appreciation, Mr. Chair, and move receipt. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other members wishing to speak? I will take a moment then. I'm actually going to move an amendment, and I wonder if the clerk could display it, and I'll paraphrase it really quick. It's just to ask Toronto Water to develop some additional communications products, and specifically a checklist related to sewer backups. I'll open my, I think, Madam Clerk, there may be an updated version of that, but it's close to that, and I'll just talk about it more. I will just thank Toronto Water as well. I know this has been a very difficult week for them, and it has to do with the sewer system and a lot of interest and concern from residents. And there we go. And you know, one of the things that you realize during these storm events is how complex the system is, and how important it is that folks have an understanding of how the system works, just in a general sense. So that they can take steps to protect their property and to address issues that come up. And there's a big difference between a sewer backup and overland flow that has to do with water pooling on the surface in a severe rainstorm event. So I thought about this a little bit, and I remember a few years back, I read a really good book, and it was called the Checklist Manifesto. And it was written by a medical professional, but he applied it to business. And he basically said, you know, I learned that in the airline industry, pilots have checklists to help them during a crisis situation. And why it was important was because, you know, you're flying a plane, you want to make sure you do all the right steps if something happens. And you can very quickly turn to a checklist, and it takes the burden of thinking through the steps off of your mind, and you can focus on things like, you know, flying the plane. And there was a lot of wisdom in how he presented the book, and he presented better outcomes in the medical industry because of the development of checklists. So the thought I had was, you know, you have water coming up the floor drain in your home, your sinks are backing up, folks are in a crisis mode, a panic mode. You've got to worry about protecting your property. You've got to worry about running a household. If you've got family, you've got to figure out where you're going to go because, you know, maybe you can't stay there and live there for some time until the situation is fixed. And I thought maybe having a checklist online that can help you out beforehand. You know, where is your clean out? Is it obstructed? Do you know who to call? Do you know where the sewer line is? Do you have trees? You know, all sorts of things to, okay, so water's coming up your drain. What should you do? What should you know? Or what can you try first? What do you do? Call 311. What do you expect? What do you have to plan for? Because the service window is 4 hours for someone to come, but it could take a little bit longer. And then, of course, there's some helpful things that could happen afterwards. So I will say Toronto Water has excellent communications, and you can go onto the city's website and learn a lot about the system. But, you know, there's always room for improvement. And I think that's the essence of what we do at the committee. And I just want to encourage through this motion, not in a critical way, in a constructive way, that maybe there's more that we can do. And that checklist idea came to mind. And I guess it could be adapted to many situations, not just a sewer backup. But again, the whole idea is if you're a citizen and you are dealing with a catastrophe which affects your life, having some really easy guidance on the things that you've got to do could make life a little bit easier. And you could do things to prepare to make the city's work in trying to address the issue just a little bit easier. So with that, I'll ask if there's any questions of me. And if there's not, I will move that amendment and ask for a vote in just a moment. So all those in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? That's carried. And on the item as amended, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. Thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it. Okay, we are now going to item SE 4.3, which is Toronto at your service, service request expansion and contact center consolidation. We do not have a presentation on this item, so I will ask members of the committee if there are questions of staff. Seeing none, I am going to take that moment.
Sorry, Mr. Chair,
Yep.
just on a point of order, I thought there was a registered speaker on this item.
I'll ask the clerk to update me. I have some limited ability to access these documents.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have one registered speaker on the speakers list.
Oh, thank you, Madam Clerk. I appreciate Councillor Ainsley's assistance. Could I ask you to call the speaker's name because I don't have it in front of me.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Our registered speaker is Ingrid Boudet.
Great. Is Ms. Boudet available? I think I see her on the line.
Yes, Mr. Chair, they're online.
Welcome, Ingrid. I know you've come to the committee before, so I'll welcome you back. And you know the procedure is 5 minutes, and I'll invite you to commence speaking as soon as you're ready. However, I don't think we can hear you.
Oh, hey.
Okay, I hear a little bit of sound coming through. Could you just give us a loud sound check?
Hello.
Hey, there we go.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, just note your mic is a bit quiet, and if you could just express that voice, it'll make it easier for us.
I'm good at that. Let me just get my screen up here and just making sure that you can then see my screen and can hear me. Yes?
We can, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, well, good morning, Chair Holliday, committee staff and city staff, or committee councillors and city staff. Thank you so much for allowing me to express my thoughts on SE 4.3, Toronto at your service, service request expansion and contact center consolidation. My name is Ingrid Boudet, and I'm founder of No More Noise Toronto. We're a grassroots organization of over 1,300 members and well over about 800 followers on social media. So this is a little bit about the next two items. And so first of all, this is going to be about noise. And I do want to give a shout out to the noise bylaw team and MLS for updating the noise bylaws. The new noise bylaws are now online, which is just fabulous. Many people were asking me about that because they came into effect June 1st of 2024. So kudos to them. But in reading the documentation, I have a concern. And there's wording in there that says data from noise complaints related to moving motor vehicle noise is crucial for the planning of enforcement initiatives with Toronto Police Services. Please contact 311 to submit all noise complaints so that the complaint data can be used to inform enforcement. So I think you all have seen this before. So this is where the process of reporting moving vehicle noise is broken. Basically, we are told to contact 311. They tell us to contact the police and the case is closed. And then, so we may contact the police, but they want picture, they want license plate, they want a description. And so for many times the complaint is never made. And why, and so many times the complaint is never made. So informing enforcement, those last two words, how is that going to happen? And that's my question from here is, if we're still reporting to 311 and then municipal licensing and standards, I'm assuming that this workflow is correct, where it would be 311 reporting to MLS, then we have a data point. When does Toronto Police get the information? How often and how do they get that information? And so why is this important? Because moving motor vehicle noise is all over the city. Last night was just incredible in my area of town. The Indy's coming and people are telling me that speeding and racing and noise is all over. And from my experience, it is the most disturbing noise source by double over the next noise source, which is amplified sound. So we really need to fix this as we are bringing divisions online. And over 92% of residents are above the World Health Organization guideline for noise levels at night based on 2016 numbers. It's gotten louder since then. Additionally, I've learned that noise is 10% of municipal licensing and standards workload and the most complex and challenging. I see that animal services has been onboarded, but what stage is noise reporting? What's the roadmap there? Again, No More Noise Toronto is very happy to be collaborating with these groups, and I'm just restating that we are available and willing. Because municipal licensing and standards in the next SE 4.4 in compliments and complaints, 18% of calls are for opening a complaint. So what percent of those is noise? Noise is complex, it's challenging, but we need to figure it out because it's impacting our health and our quality of life. And I think we really need to look through logical and outcome-oriented process mapping and implementation. So my recommendations is examine the noise reporting process in detail, right at this golden opportunity that we have with Mr. York bringing in Salesforce. Let's look at how we can make that intake process work for many people, allow anonymous reporting, allow for autofill in the form, less screens, please, and receive all noise reports at all times. And if the data, maybe we need to look at the workflow. And if I'm reporting a noise, moving vehicle noise report to 311, maybe that doesn't go to MLS. Maybe it goes directly to Toronto Police Services because the data, I believe, will be stored in 311. So let's look at that because right now it's broken and people are really frustrated. And ensure also that the noise report tracking numbers keep the resident informed. Based on the last meeting, there looked like there might be a disconnect between Salesforce and then what happens in municipal licensing and standards. So let's fix that and communicate the processes to the public. We really need to know what's going on with our noise reports. So short and sweet today, let's create a better Toronto by reducing noise. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your presentation. I will ask the members of the committee, who I all can't see right now on my screen, but if anyone has any questions for you.
I have a question.
Councillor Cheng, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Ingrid, for coming and making this very important deputation. I, too, have discovered the dead end that we can find ourselves in when we're trying to figure out how to make a report about noise. And I wonder, what have you reached out also to Toronto Police Services in terms of what their process is?
Yes, I have. I'm sorry, my phone is ringing in the other room. If you hear that, it's noisy here right now. I have reached out to Toronto Police Services and I've had two video virtual meetings with them to understand. And they're in a tough spot, like the resourcing is an issue. They, sometimes the thought is, well, you want us to chase these vehicles. No, we don't. We want preventative enforcement. And so there's supposed to be joint inspection events this summer between Toronto Police Services where they pull over the car and then municipal licensing and standards where they will test the stationary vehicle, which is what the city has jurisdiction over. But when they talked about how many officers they have in their divisions that can manage these complaints, they don't have enough staff. And then the whole procedure has to go through court. So if I were to report something, I have to show up. The driver has to show up. The police officer has to show up. So I really think that some of these could be administrative penalties that would make it faster and remove the court process. But also I asked them what would help. And their words were automated enforcement. So I think that's where we need to go, technology eventually.
Mm-hmm. And right now, so somebody hears a very loud noise, a muffler perhaps in the neighborhood. They call 311 and 311, what happens?
Well, the process might have changed since the last time I did it. But basically, so I know they're online here as well, so they might be able to answer better than I. But basically what happens is I would lodge a complaint. So first of all, I would use the app because I do like the app, but the app will not allow me to place the noise source where the noise source is. It wants to be my home. My home isn't actually the noise source. The noise source can be a kilometer away, and the radius doesn't allow for that. So right there, it starts to get complicated. In any case, if the response is, or if the report is made, we get a thank you very much. This is taken. This information will be used for further to inform enforcement, let's just say. And then they say, we can't do anything about moving vehicles, so please contact the Toronto Police. And the last time I got that response, there wasn't a contact number, there wasn't any additional help to facilitate that next loop of the complaint process.
And have you been informed at all of where these joint enforcements are happening in our city? Is there any information sharing, or are we trying to keep it under wraps so that perpetrators don't know?
Well, we do need to keep it under wraps so perpetrators don't know. But I was lucky enough to be asked by Municipal Licensing and Standards to ask for public input, to ask for input on this. And so we did a survey, and actually, Councillor Chang, you put it in your newsletter, and within 24 hours, you had over 100 points in your ward. And so that information I have now shared publicly on social media. I have my Not 311 noise report, vehicle reports, and also the results of that most recent survey. I have contacted Municipal Licensing and Standards, hoping that I could at least audit the process or witness it, because I understand we can't make those public. And I was told that they're keeping it under wraps and that I won't be a part of that. And it's a little disappointing, maybe understanding. I'm still kind of processing that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you so much for being a noise advocate for our city. I really appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Councillor Chang.
Thank you for the questions. Are there other questions? I'll ask quickly as well. And Madam Clerk, if you could start the timer, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I too always enjoy them because of the thoughtfulness. I wondered if you could help suggest how we address citizens through the process maybe a little closer. I think one of the really important things that we can do is help set expectations. Mm-hmm. But balance that with really simple messaging so that it doesn't become overly complicated in calling 311. And you and I think, can recognize the difference between calling about a particular car with a noisy muffler. And, you know, it's not realistic to expect really anyone's going to do anything. I mean, the 311 is not going to dispatch a noise officer because the car's gone, you know, nor would the police. But there is a difference about, you know, chronic sites or locations where there's issues. And I think that is valuable to inform enforcement. And then, of course, there's the whole other specter of chronic issues about certain things that are making noise that fall within the noise bylaws where they'd send an officer. Have you seen any examples of how you get that level of message to people so that there's a fair expectation? And you know why it matters to the Service Excellence Committee is we don't want citizens to be dissatisfied or apathetic and say, well, you know, I called that car in, but no one did anything because, you know, the expectation wasn't set.
Thank you for that question, Chair Holiday. It's and that's the thing, when we're told to call 311 for all noise complaints, and then we are immediately literally shut down because it is a moving vehicle noise complaint and the city can't do anything. People don't know that. I am the one who's out there talking to people and basically saying, hey, the city can't do anything about moving vehicle noise. And they're like, oh, but we're told to call three. So right there is a mismatch of expectations. And that's where my suggestion comes from. Like, depending on where the data is housed at the city, what would be the most efficient way for it to get to Toronto Police Services? Because, you know, it's not about going and tracking that vehicle and hunting it down. That's not what it's about, but I'm thinking about it's creating a database of vehicles that are issues, because I think that there's actually only 1% of vehicle noisemakers. Really, I don't think it's many people, but that one person can impact so many people. So collecting a database of where those are with a license plate, if possible, and whether that is just a static picture, but we need to start creating, like there's two highway traffic acts, right? 75.1, which is illegal muffler, 75.4, which is unnecessary noise. So 75.1 could literally be an administrative penalty of a license plate and what is an illegal muffler. Do I know what an illegal muffler is? Yes, no, maybe so. And that's the sticky point. What is illegal and what isn't? And nobody better to determine that than Toronto Police. So somewhere there's a gap, and that's where our expectations are not met.
So I'm going to describe noise complaints into 3 buckets, and maybe you can let me know if I've got it wrong, because I want to make sure I understand the layout. So the first bucket is all of the traditional MLS noise type complaints. Noisy fan on a restaurant roof that the owner doesn't know about is making a clicking noise all night and upsetting people nearby. Classic request for enforcement, and the whole wide range of noisy things in a city. The second bucket is vehicle-related noise. Whether it's horn blaring, squealing tires, or noisy mufflers, which is usually the case, but on a location basis. I can pick the spots in the community that I live in. 427 highway is a great example, right? Things ripping up and down that, fill the night air. Mm-hmm. And so you can say, at this location, I hear lots of stuff all the time. And then the third bucket is literally vehicle specific or person specific, to say, there's this blue car and that person lives around here and I see it all the time and it makes me mad. Is that kind of a fair layout, or am I missing anything in that?
No, I think you've got it fairly. You've got that, and that's where the motor vehicle is actually 2 pieces. It's them on the road, so that's the state 75.4 in a sense. That's the unnecessary noise that they do while driving, because some of these vehicles, and I think you guys know, like I sent you that Mustang video where they can drive quietly if they want, but they choose not to. And then the other ones, and that's stock. And then the other ones are the ones that intentionally modify. And those we can see with the big pipe hanging out the back, and that to me, that's 75.1, which is illegal muffler. And so I think you've got it right there.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, we'll take it back into the committee. Are there questions of staff? All right, I'll take an opportunity to ask. I know Mr. Grant is in the room, and I'll ask Mr. Grant if it's possible for you to talk to the committee a little bit about where we're at with communicating issues around noise, and with respect to the issues raised by the speaker today. Have you got anything that the committee might think about with respect to this?
Sure, and thank you for the question. We've been working closely with 311 and Ingrid and other noise advocates to make sure that we're taking in noise complaints for areas that may or may not fall within the noise bylaw. In the past, we did not take in noise complaints for leaf blowers, cars, etc., and now we do. And what we do with that information is we map it and we determine where it's happening the most. And then we work with our colleagues in TPS to arrange for dedicated enforcement whereby we pull over vehicles. That is challenging, as it's difficult for me to compel TPS to commit to those. They have many priorities in their various wards and districts where they have to address that are of higher priority than this. But we have done these in the past. With mixed reviews. We've done them in Humber Bay Shores, Lakeshore area. We've done them in Yorkville, and we've done them at the foot of the DVP and Gardner. Again, mixed reviews. While it is loud, we pull vehicles over, and what we have found is that they are within the noise limitations. What they do not have is often they don't have insurance, they don't have a license, and so they more have highway traffic incidents that the police deal with, and the noise to date, most of the ones that we have measured have been within the thresholds established within the noise bylaw.
In the case where I was asking in my question, a resident says, that blue car down the street, it goes out and it makes a bunch of noise every night. And maybe they understand they don't expect a 311 bylaw officer to be there. How would we advise a resident to advance that? Or what's our expectation with respect to how a resident forwards their concern?
So we have a communications campaign launching next week. It's important that we manage expectations. It's important that we call 311 to identify where the noise is happening. Can we solve it for that one vehicle? No. Can we identify areas that are problematic and work with the police to set up dedicated enforcement areas? Yes. So we use that information. It's very important for people to call 311 so we know where the noise is happening. But what's really important is that we manage their expectations, that we cannot identify that car, pull that car over and remove its muffler and stop the noise. That's what's really important, and that's what's frustrating and challenging, and I understand that from the residents' perspective. But I have to be practical that 30 people on a noise team are not going to be able to deal with the amount of noise that's coming from vehicles in our city.
Thank you. And just on the final piece, I think you addressed it somewhat in the first part of the response, but do I understand there is a mechanism that MLS can bridge information about chronic noise issues over to the TPS? And maybe you could talk a little bit about it or help us understand.
So again, with the communication campaign, we work very closely with the police, with 311, with other agencies on a campaign called Make the Right Call. And it's to educate the public on the types of noise and who to call and who will deal with it. The slide that Ingrid puts up with the people being bounced around is a real situation that is frustrating for members of the public. We recognize that, we understand that, and we are working together to mitigate that through education. It is challenging, it is frustrating, we acknowledge that, but it is something we are working diligently with the police, with 311 and other partners.
Thank you. I'll ask, are there any other questions of staff on this item? Seeing none, I will ask if someone would like to speak on this matter.
I'll move receipt.
Thank you. Councillor Ainsley moves receipt. And I will just take a moment to speak very briefly just to thank Mr. York for bringing this report forward. It's an incremental report, and it really speaks to future work that we're going to see about the committee, about the overall process and the integration of additional areas of service of the city into the standardized system. But I do appreciate today's speaker and raising the particular item, which is important to, I think, all councillors because we hear about it. And of course, that is a representation of things that are on the minds of citizens. And I know I certainly appreciate the complexities of the laws around noise and the sensitivity of how we interact with citizens and make sure that their complaint goes to the right place and is used in the right way, and that expectations are set. And I think that continues to be a work in progress. I really thank the citizens who advocate on this behalf, and I really appreciate the work of staff because I do see it as a collaborative effort. So thank you, everyone. On that, I will ask for a vote on Councillor Ainsley's motion to receive. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that carries. We will go to our final agenda item, which is SE 4.4. and that is a report on complaints and compliments phase 2 plan. And I believe, Mr. York, you do have a presentation for us. So I will invite you to proceed with that as soon as you're ready.
Thanks. We'll just take a couple of minutes to get the presentation up, and then we'll walk through it. Perfect. So today, thank you for the opportunity to meet with the Customer Experience Division's team and to really talk about the complaints and compliments update and where we stand from a phase 1 transitioning to phase 2. On the next slide, we talk about the city's complaints and compliments process. For example, phase 1 of the compliments and complaints project enabled the public to submit complaints, compliments, and comments and escalations for 5 integrated divisions within the City of Toronto. These divisions included 311, MLS, Solid Waste Management, Toronto Water, and Transportation. And even to tie into the previous comments related to noise, noise represents about less than 1% of the activity that goes along in this portfolio. It's actually 0.87. So just in terms of understanding context, and then looking at the complaints process and improvements, just for that alone, we've actually initiated through the leadership of Carleton and TPS and CXD, a better handoff process between 311 and TPS. So if someone does come into 311, they're no longer told just to call TPS and they're on their own. We actually have a warm transfer process that does that. Then we also have a committee that looks at data and so forth. So back to the slide, the public can now create a complaint through the web or mobile app or via the phone. It's redesigned, so basically leveraging the Salesforce platform and that omni-channel environment and multiple channels to manage the experience. Redesign division's complaints process, web pages, clear, simplified language. In many cases, we've talked about in the past, having 49 different ways to initiate a complaint within the city is very confusing for many people that even work in the city, and definitely for visitors, businesses, and members of the public. Now there's one standard. Standardized escalation processes across the divisions to manage and track the cases. And we have a dedicated project team to manage this across the city. So yes, we were successfully implemented phase 1, and really with the objective to drive efficiency, fairness, transparency, and accountability. And we also wanted to make sure from a fairness perspective, we included the ombudsman through this particular journey as well and received that blessing. In regards to an overview of complaints and compliments with the integrated divisions, right now we've issued or received almost 5,000 compliments and complaints across the city. Now, granted, it's really nice to get some compliments, which is representing about 6%, but overall complaints represent about 93%. In regards to the complaints that meet service levels, 76% of them are meeting them today. In terms of escalated complaints, only 5% of those complaints are actually escalated for dissatisfaction or timeframes, which basically means that through this automated process, not only is it simplified, but there's accountability, transparency, and improved experiences overall. In terms of days on average to manage an escalation once it's done, it's 18 days through the system. In the next phase, we'll look at standardizing that and actually improving the escalation processes and standards. In terms of the 93% of the public, that do interact with, 311, a lot of the public still want to utilize the online experience, and this is evident in the next slide. So in terms of mobile app, emails, and phone channels, the mobile app still only has 4% of people coming through it. Email, we don't necessarily want to leverage that as a channel of choice, so we push that back to the service requests. And then the phone channel is still 93%. The good news is, irrelevant of the channel of choice, there's a standard process. There's better accountability and transparency. And instead of an email or a resident forced to engage a division via an email where there's a lack of paper trail and accountability, we now have a record from an end-to-end perspective. And this data is from February the 24th to June the 24th. In the next slide, please. Out of the 480, almost 5,000 complaints, compliments that were actually received in the last 4 months, some of them were related to customer experience, the division itself, some related to MLS, some related to Toronto Water, some for transportation, and some to solid waste management. As you can see, a lot of people are passionate about their garbage, and there's comments and perspectives that are placed upon that. And as you can see with Lou's conversation, people are also very passionate about their water and turning on, turning off, so on and so forth, and water damage related issues. In regards to the top 10 complaints that are received through 301 in the major issues, you're really looking at curb delayed issue or collections, curb of collection in terms of staff, outcomes of service for transportation and ops, timeliness of service, staff service in terms of behaviors, in terms of quality of experience within 311, process and procedures related to Toronto Water, timeliness, bins, restoration, and apartment and collection of information. Now, what's really interesting or complementary is that this work will also be part of the dashboard work that's going to be coming in towards the end of Q3. So you'll have a holistic perspective, not only on the service requests, but on the complaints and compliments that are provided by our residents, businesses, and visitors. In terms of the trends and complaints, as you can see, they're moving up. And the next slide, in February, we started at 156, and in May and June, higher months, we're at 1,400 and 1,300. So the good news is we have data. We also understand the natures and the nuances of it, and we'll figure out a method of communicating to the members of council what those trends and issues are through the dashboard and proper governance. In regards to the next slide, which is also very interesting, it's around customer satisfaction. So one of the things that we realized is that the rates of satisfaction are really crucial. And in terms of the general inquiries that come across through 311, especially through the phone channel, satisfaction rates are 94%. And how do we know that? It's because we poll our residents on every interaction that comes through 311. So it's not our opinion. This is the public's opinions responding to surveys and their perceptions. In regards to service requests and from a self-serve perspective, we know that right now the overall satisfaction rate is 71%. Now that number could be misleading because I know we always want to go better and have better results and more robust numbers. But from an industry perspective and standard, that's been verified through Gartner research. From a mobile online experience, which is self-serve, anything above 65% from an organization is trending in a very good direction. And right now we're at 71. Now, what will make it better is the work that we're working on closing the loop with the bidirectional flow from EWMS into Salesforce. That's going to be extremely important for a better, robust experience. Councillor Ainsley, you're very passionate about the photos and making sure those photos are being seen. By the end of this year, those photos will be populated from a bidirectional perspective with transportation and 311 for residents. Another good thing is, in terms of overall satisfaction rates for people issuing complaints, it's 73%. And usually when people issue complaints, there's some area of tension and dissatisfaction to begin with. So even translating to a 73%, outcome is very good, but we can always move from good to great. So in terms of those, surveys and insights, we wanted to make sure that that was clearly articulated in this presentation. In regards to opportunities, moving forward, we feel that divisions are receiving complaints directly via email, phone, and from the public councils. They're not necessarily entered into Salesforce. That has to change. We're saying that Salesforce, the CRM tool via 311, is the customer interaction tool. And if you want to leverage data, understand the true voice of the residents, absolutely, we want no wrong door. We want to continue to use those particular avenues, but then call 311 or send 311 or create that service request via 311 so we have that record in this system. So therefore, we'll have more robust and accurate statistics that come along with that. Not all complaints also fit, from the public fit into categories created by 301 divisions. So we also want to review those categorizations and make it more robust and make it more applicable from not a division's perspective, but from the resident's perspective. So there's more work ahead of us to do so. And that's part of the phase 2 work. In regards to, complaints, 56% of complaints are open against previously open service requests. So increasing the service request satisfaction and the milestones and notifications that come along with that will also decrease the number of complaints. They're part and parcel. That's the third bullet. And then what we've also realized from a CSAT perspective and what have you in terms of satisfaction, we want to evaluate strategies to communicating complaints and really have a comms strategy that's more robust. I know that we've increased that focus when it's about make the right call campaign. We also want to increase that focus to our public around utilizing the survey tool, around utilizing the complaints and compliments and feedback. The public has a strong voice. We want to make sure that the tools are there and they're being utilized in a more effective and consistent manner. In terms of the next steps that our division will drive in terms of CXD, in the next slide, the customer experience division are accessing divisions right now. We're working with transportation, we're working with shelters and housing, we're working with revenue services and so forth to make sure that phase 2 is more robust. We're also working with fleet, and we're looking to get fleet up by end of July, no later than the end of August. So they'll be on the phase 2 part of it as well. We also know that what's really also important is working on the escalation process and policy. So not only are we looking at from a technological perspective in terms of functionality, but we're also looking at policy to make sure that it's consistent and fair across the organization. So when an escalation does come or does arise, there's a standard service level that comes along with that escalation. Our goal is also to continue to monitor statistics over the next few months, establish trends and compare those benchmarks, and share that through the Integrated Service Divisions Committee and also with members of council. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. York. I'll ask the committee members if there's a question. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. And I'm not sure if this is to Gary. I do have questions, I know, for Gary. But the first one I wanted to ask about the metrics and where we are in publishing publicly metrics for each division. I know that Gary talked about a dashboard in the fall. When are we looking at making metrics publicly available?
Through the chair, great question. And the first thing we wanted to do is get your blessing from council in terms of the dashboard and make sure that it's easily readily available for members of council. So by the end of Q3 going into Q4, every member of council will have access to those dashboards.
Sorry, Gary, I meant like metrics available not only to councillors, but to the public as well. So they know when they send in, for example, a pothole request, and they get an email back from 311 that says the pothole is going to be filled within 5 days, that they can go and look at a metric publicly that says, hey, the public works or transportation, 85% of the time filled a pothole in 5 days.
Yep. So councillor, just to go on that narrative. So the first phase was to make sure that all councillors got that information. And in 2025, we will make that public. And we'll make sure that's going through the CXD website, and public can access those service levels and performance from a metrics perspective, as well as the call volumes and trends as well.
Okay, and why not available until 2025?
One, we want to make sure that we test it with members of council to make sure it meets your expectations. And then we also have to look at the licensing that comes along with that to make it publicly accessible and make sure that the AODA requirements are also there. So we want to make sure that we have a phased and thoughtful roadmap and approach that comes along with that. So the first step is to make sure that members of council will have that. The next step is public, and we are on track to make sure that the public has that at 2025.
Okay, and then my questions are now actually, I know they're for you, Gary. The one slide about 93% of the public prefer to speak to a live person on a complaint, and it says the web/mobile is at 4%. I guess I'm asking, how can we increase that? And I can speak to my own experience using the app. 99.9% of the time I use the app. But I guess, I'll use the example of if I have an illegal sign on a boulevard, there's multiple steps that I go through to file that. And, there's some of them, is this an emergency? Yes or no? Is this a public housing property? Yes or no? Is part of the 93% of the public preferring a live operator, is that because of the number of steps they have to go through in using the app to file a complaint to get to an SRO number, or do you have any?
We've trained the public to use the contact center. And in a way, we're doing a really good job in terms of managing the calls. The other thing is because we've created a service request process driven by the division standards and requirements versus the customer's experience and view. So what we're trying to do through the tier 1 work that we discussed on the consolidation of the contact centers is to revisit how we actually do service requests and re-envision that experience from an end-to-end perspective. So we are working with key divisions to make that happen in the phased approach, which will drive more adoption to the web as well.
Okay, and then I wanted to ask the one slide deck. So I understand the 71% positive interaction, and you said that there's a 65% industry standard, which anything above that is good. So related to that, you said that somewhere 56% of the complaints are opened against a previously open service request. Is there a standard for that? Like you talked earlier about 65% is kind of the gold standard for 71% of positive interaction. Is there a similar standard across 311 systems if you have to reopen a complaint? Because if you're saying 65% is kind of the gold standard for positive, 56% of complaints having to reopen seems like we're hitting the negative.
If through the chair, so if I understand that question correctly, some of those issues for the service requests have to do with the lack of data or how we close the service requests. So part of the behaviors that we're trying to drive through the dashboard is a more consistent approach in terms of how we manage that service request. And then through closing the loop, it's how we communicate that service request from end to end. So part of the issues that we've created is really our lack of envisioning the overall user experience. So if we continue around, the roadmap of informing and developing that closing the loop approach, as well as proper milestone management, we are going to enhance that particular repeat of the closing of service requests or complaints associated with how we've managed those service requests. Overall, when we look at the number of service requests that are being generated, there is an overall high satisfaction rate, especially around the delivery of 71%. But we can do better and have to do better in regards to how we communicate those milestones to the resident. So in essence, we want to get to 80%. So that 71%, we would love to get to 80%, which will drive down that 56% percentage.
Okay, all right, thank you. I think I'm at the end of my time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. And to be clear, if we need to go to a second round, I think we can do it. It's our last item. Councillor Ching, do you have any questions?
Yes, I wanted to ask questions about email. I know we're discouraging people from doing it because if you email 311, you get a reply that you should try to use other avenues. And I'm a little confused because I see email as a valid channel on the tier 1 spreadsheet here, and I guess I'm trying to understand the role of email in the system.
To the chair, great question. So we still have email as a channel. We're just asking you not to create service requests for emails, but if you have general inquiries, still contact us. If you're looking for information or what have you across the city, we still respond in a timely fashion. But a service request is really seen as a more complex, more costly endeavor that we want to address in a more timely fashion. So from that perspective, we discourage emails. But I know, for example, working with BIAs and what have you, some of them would rather us use that channel, but it's very ineffective and very inefficient. What we're able to do, for example, with BIAs, is create customized reporting, which allows them to see those things in a more unified perspective. So that it's still a channel of choice, and we don't want to, remove that channel in its entirety. We're just asking for a change in behavior in regards to when it relates to service requests. But from a correspondence perspective, we're very committed to the email channel.
I think the auto reply on the 311 might be a little confusing because most people would not necessarily know the difference between a complaint and a service request. Those are, I think, our in-house technical delineations. But when people look at the world and they're encountering something, they don't necessarily know, oh, this is a service request and this is a complaint or question. So I guess it might be helpful to re-examine the auto reply on the 311 email just to clarify for people, because I'm not sure that it's clear.
Through the chair, we'll definitely do that, but we also want to make sure that we don't necessarily want to receive complaints or service requests via email, because the inability to close the loop becomes an issue. When we have that record of choice, that individual can choose how to be communicated back to you in terms of the updates, which can be email, which can be SMS and what have you. But now there's a record that creates that. So at the end of the day, even to issue a complaint, you need to have a number, a 7-digit number that goes through the system. So we'll do better in terms of rectifying that, and I'll definitely take that as a lesson learned and apply to addressing that response.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering, this new complaints and compliments, we get, as counselors, get a monthly update, what's happening on 311. Will we also receive a summary of the complaints and compliments that are from our ward?
Through the chair, that's a fantastic question. And our goal is to definitely do that. What we want to make sure, though, is I work with my colleagues at the division head level to make sure that they're comfortable with that particular approach and commit to a timeline of when we can do so. So it's definitely in the roadmap and it will happen. And ideally, it would like to happen this year.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. Madam Brooke, if you could assist me with the timer. Mr. York, I just wanted to pick up on the piece on email. Is it my understanding that one of the limitations of email is when you have an iterative process to open a service request, email can take a really long time because your team has to manage the general mailbox. Within the team, you have to figure out who's handling the case. And, for example, if somebody emails in a picture of a pothole and says, can you get this fixed? Maybe somebody has to email back and say, well, can you tell me where it is? And then they email back, well, it's near this intersection. And then email back and say, well, can you tell me a bit more? And, that can take days. Whereas if somebody uses the app, within moments, all the questions are asked, all the information is bundled up, and off it goes. And the pothole would be filled before somebody used the email process to go and make the service request. And I'm being a little silly with my example, but these things happen, and so there's a bit of a rationale around why there's that limitation. But you don't necessarily say you don't look at email. You just need members of the public to try to use a system to bring in certain types of requests.
Great question to the chair. I'd like to approach it a little differently. Absolutely, it's time intensive, but it also costs a lot more money. So when we look at it, for example, going through a phone, and that phone interaction is, let's say, about 3 minutes and 20 seconds, that's still costing per interaction anywhere from $11 to $16 per transaction. Now, when you look at going through an email, although the initial cost is minimal because you're using technology to transmit it, the time to go back and forth at least 4 times to get clarity goes much more than that $16 per hour on that transaction. Now, when we use the mobile app, it's 10 cents to $1.
Okay. I just want to follow up more generally on the report. I want to make sure I clarified an important distinction. So, for instance, in the report, I'm looking at my screen here, curb day collection, solid waste management, 1,033 is a very significant contributor to complaints. But what I understand correctly, there's a very big difference between somebody calling in and saying, I want to complain that my garbage was missed from being picked up, because that's actually a service request. That is a very typical standard item. And it would be more than 1,033. I mean, that's That's a big item that happens across the city in a busy city. The complaint you're talking about here is somebody calls in and says, yeah, my garbage got picked up. I got my service. But the operator left the bin on its side and drove away. And so it's more of a complaint about the execution of the service itself. Is that a fair understanding?
Through the chair, absolutely.
Okay. And then, to be a finer point on it, if somebody calls in and says, I want to make a complaint because, Mr. DiGeronimo's water team didn't get here in the 4 hours that was promised on the service standard, it's now late. I want to complain about that. How does that get handled in this report that you've got in front of us?
Through the chair, we would issue a complaint request.
Okay.
It would go through Salesforce. We'd have the initiator's information there. We communicate that the expectation. That would then go to the division and manage through the standard escalation or complaints process. And just because someone does have an opinion on something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a valid opinion or the output would be what they want it to be. But the due diligence in terms of investigating the matter will always occur.
Back to Councillor Ainsley's point, there's a difference between 56% coming from a service request versus my example of the garbage collection. There is no service request, but there's still potential for people to call in and say, I've got this concern. I'd like you to lodge the complaint. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that the ratio is far apart.
Through the chair, correct.
Okay, and one last question. We've got some really interesting data before us. How does it come to the next level? So how do I understand what the bar on the chart that says curb day collections, 1,033 complaints, is all about? Maybe my example is the prevalent one, the bin fell over. You also talk in the report about other divisions that will likely come online next. And I think you put in the top 5 of really busy areas that represent 78%, I think, of all the complaints in the city. That's going to tell us some really interesting stories about what people are thinking about our services. So where do we go from here?
Through the chair, very good question. And I would ask that we utilize the infrastructure that we're putting in place by the end of Q3 around the dashboards and populate that with certain, key activities that will, demonstrate trends, so on and so forth. And then the other comment around the quarterly and yearly reports that are generated from CXD, we should also have those trends and nuances articulated there that are sent to members of council. And then the third aspect would be to continue utilizing this particular form and have divisions come up and speak about their journey and the actions that they're managing. But most importantly, what we're trying to do is refine the Integrated Service Divisions Committee and the governance that comes along with that to make sure that we have work plans that will address these issues. And then we have an aligned methodology of communicating it to yourselves as well as the members of the public.
Thank you. I'll check with the committee. Are there any further questions, a second round required on this? Seeing none, members wishing to speak? Councillor Ainsley?
Yep, I'm sorry. I don't know if Councillor Chen would like to move the report. I'm more than happy to do it. I just want to, thank staff for their work on this. Gary knows I'm a big user of the 311 app. I find it very useful, as I've said. I do find at other times I find it a bit cumbersome trying to file complaints or issues. I know he's trying to work with that and streamline that. I very much appreciate that, and I look forward to seeing more of the numbers, the dashboard of the metrics going live in public, because when I am out and about in my ward and people are asking about service levels, and I know that people want to see value for their tax dollars, for myself as well. I always tell people I pay my tax dollars too. But I do know, and I get frustrated as well when you file a complaint with 311 and it's supposed to be done within 5 days and it's not. I know that's not the fault of Gary or his staff. They're not the frontline workers dealing with the issues. But I do know that the public, and myself as well, I would like to have a better understanding of how long it takes us to fulfill 311 service request orders. And I know that in this day and age, as people are watching their money and their taxes, and as I said, they want to get the best value for their dollar. And I'm looking forward to seeing those metrics. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cheng, shall we put you down as moving the receipt? All right. And I'll speak very briefly, Madam Clerk, if you could start my timer. I have to express my thanks to Mr. York and his team, and really the city's management team. I know this is really important work, and what's really exciting about it is it's very new. Some of the insights that I discovered along the process of learning about this is there aren't a lot of jurisdictions doing this type of work, and that's what makes it really exciting for the city of Toronto, a big city like this. So there's two big questions, and they're handled differently. And the first question may not necessarily be centered around this report, but it's providing insight to members of council and really citizens about how we're doing. And so there's other dashboards and reporting mechanisms that will tell us, did we meet those service standards, those windows? How are we doing on an aggregate? Is there a problem, right? About a gap between how we're doing versus what we expect we're going to be doing. But this report talks about a really interesting next layer of the data, which is trying to understand what citizens think of the services that we're doing. And so there's clearly very important questions, especially around budget, about setting those service standards and those windows and those expectations. Those are very, very clear decisions that management and council make to create the services that we have and oversee them. But then taking a closer look about things that go well and things that don't go well within the services is really crucial. And I think private companies do it. Any business owner is going to do that. Someone that runs a restaurant are going to say, hey, did we get the food for you according to what was on the menu? And did we get it out on time and hot? That's the checkbox. But what did you think of the food? And, that's the same thing can be applied to the services. So I really just wanted to express my appreciation for the work, and I really look forward to seeing how this system unfolds and matures, because I think we'll really have a better organization and better service to the public because of it. So with that, I will move Councillor Cheng, or I will thank Councillor Cheng for moving the motion of receipt. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that carries. Madam Clerk, I'm just confirming that concludes the last order of business.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that completes the agenda.
And with that, I will let everyone know that the meeting is adjourned, and with my express thanks to members of council, to the clerk's team, and to the technology team and staff. I know it was a very difficult day from a tech perspective, and thank everyone for their patience on the late start. But I'm pleased that we can complete the meeting and complete the agenda. Have a great day, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much.